When Assassin's Creed Odyssey launches next week, one of the first things you'll do is to choose to play as either Alexios or Kassandra, but this choice turns out to be purely cosmetic. The dialogue and story do not change, and the inhabitants of the world treat you the same way no matter who you choose. In this video, I'll be discussing why this is the wrong choice for the series, despite how appealing it might sound. In a recent written interview, narrative director Melissa McCoubrey discusses why this decision was made, saying, "It was important to me that if we were going to let you choose if you're going to play as a woman or a man, which is awesome because I think that everyone should be equal, it should be an equal experience. I was really adamant that we not make it a bad experience for someone who chose a female character. If their experiences are vastly different, you can make someone feel bad about making a certain choice. When you think of historical fiction, there are a lot of naysayers who say things like, oh well, this isn't historically accurate, but I don't think they would realize that it would suck to have people yelling at you because you're a woman for the entire game. It would have been terrible if we'd made a game where people were constantly berating you for being different. That's not something you have fun in. I was adamant that we didn't call out the gender differences. At the end of the day, we're making a video game, not a historical documentary. In the spirit of equality, I wanted to make sure you weren't getting a different experience for the wrong reasons." I want to start with the line, "I don't think they realized that it would suck to have people yelling at you because you're a woman for the entire game." To start, things can be handled more subtly than just having everyone yelling at the player the whole game. Nobody is asking for this game to recreate The Handmaid's Tale. Characters like Connor and Adewale were subjected to incidents of racism without it constantly happening the whole game or whitewashing their heritage, and their stories are better for that.
You I recognize, not the savage.
He is my son.
Tasted of the forest fruits, did you?
What'll you do with your share of the gold we take from Governor Torres? Return to Africa, prince among men.
I cannot return to a place I've never been. With this skin and this voice, where can I go in the world and feel at ease? This country here is my best chance. This country called Jackdaw.
And since Odyssey is all about choice, I think it would actually be pretty interesting if, for example, you ran into a sexist quest giver who initially dismisses your offer to help him. Why not then give the player the option to A, ignore them and never help them because screw that, B, fulfill their task anyway and impress them when you finish it, or C, just beat the ever-loving shit out of them and see if they still think you're not capable for the job. There are plenty of ways to acknowledge that Kassandra is a woman without making the game a miserable experience. In fact, many enjoyable moments with the other female protagonists in the series come from acknowledging and often subverting society's expectations of women in these time periods. People would likely vastly underestimate Kassandra's abilities because she's a woman, and that's surely something she would use to her advantage. It doesn't have to be a horrible experience. The other line I want to examine from Melissa's interview is when she says, "At the end of the day, we're making a video game, not a historical documentary." This line speaks to a larger problem at Ubisoft with regards to how inconsistently they treat the importance of historical accuracy. On one hand, they love to tout historical accuracy when it comes to things like speaking authentic Mohawk in AC3, or promising to tell the real stories of pirates in AC4, or when they parade their historians around in videos about recreating historical places and periods. Crucially, the commitment to historical accuracy is also vital to maintaining the illusion of one of the central concepts of the series, that Assassin's Creed takes place in our real world, and our real history, and that the secret war between Assassins and Templars is woven throughout that. On the other hand, Ubisoft also loves to downplay the importance of historical accuracy whenever it's inconvenient to them, like when they want to give Unity British accents, or Melissa's line about making a video game and not a historical documentary.
Can't I go with you, Father?
As for how I feel about all this, while some concessions will always need to be made in order to make a fun video game, I don't think obliterating historical sexism is one of them. I truly believe that this series is at its best and most compelling when it hews as close as possible to depicting historic time periods and cultures as they actually were, and that doing otherwise actively harms core concepts of the series. And when you promote your series as showing the real history of the world, to ignore things like sexism is as bad as claiming that it never existed. One side note before we continue, some of you may wonder why I advocate both for historical accuracy and Kassandra as the only character, as those things might seemingly be at odds. The answer is that while a woman from Sparta turned mercenary would be uncommon but not impossible, what would be impossible is for her to be treated exactly the same way a man would in the world. Finally, I want to leave you with this thought exercise, and it concerns another Assassin's Creed title by the Quebec studio, Freedom Cry. The spin-off from AC4 uses Adewale to examine racism and slavery in Haiti from the perspective of a former slave. Now, while racism and sexism are not exactly the same, they do share a lot of similarities. Both race and gender are largely determined at birth and something you generally have no control over, and both are part of established hierarchies that dictate generally how well you will be treated in life, with white men sitting at the top of both. And while great progress has been made over the centuries on these issues, racism and sexism are both very much alive and well in today's world. Why then are Ubisoft Quebec and many of the same writers okay with tackling the issue of racism in Freedom Cry, but not sexism in Odyssey? We won't know for sure without hearing from the writers themselves, but the way Melissa describes historical sexism as impossible to implement without being a bad experience hints that such elements might hit too close to home for her and other female writers on the team. Contrast this with the fact that the Freedom Cry writing team, as far as I know, had no persons of color on it. But this begs the question, if a black writer had been on Freedom Cry, would they similarly object to depictions of racism and slavery in the game, decrying it as a bad experience for people of color when racism is still prevalent in the world today? Or would they jump at the chance to give an unflinching portrayal of racism in history, while viewing the modern-day parallels it raises as a boon to the series instead of a detriment? My hope is that it would be more the latter than the former. Imagine, then, how ridiculous it would be if you were given a choice at the start of Freedom Cry between Edward and Adewale, and the story and characters treated you exactly the same despite your skin color. Freedom Cry was an interesting game precisely because it embraced the uncomfortable elements of history instead of shying away from them and trying to appeal to everybody. All of this is to say that at the end of the day, we aren't truly getting Kassandra's story in Odyssey, despite her being the canon character. We're either getting a man's story or a genderless potato story with a Kassandra skin wrapped on top of it. That's probably the worst possible way to handle a female character in my opinion, and for a series that often touts its commitment to historical accuracy, shying away from historical sexism does it no favors.